The greatest inventions often announce themselves with a whisper before shaking the world. But the work of Dr. Elias Vance? It started with silence, a chilling, profound absence that redefined the very nature of technological progress. In the spring of 2003, Elias Vance ceased to exist. Not dead, not missing in the conventional sense, just gone. The meticulously organized lab on the outskirts of Zurich was pristine. The equipment was powered down, the coffee machine was cold, and the security logs showed no entry or exit for 72 hours preceding the discovery. All that remained was a single cryptic data file named simply Nexus. Vance wasn't a household name. He was a theoretical physicist, brilliant but ostracized, who believed that the true challenge of the 21st century wasn't harnessing clean energy, but proving the instability of linear time. He operated entirely outside institutional funding, fueled only by a manic certainty that the universe was hiding a fundamental mechanism, a kind of machine code, that we were overlooking. The 1990s were an era of technological acceleration. We mastered the digital world, optimized global logistics, and connected continents. But we hit a wall in fundamental physics. Vance believed the flaw wasn't in our math, but in our assumption that cause preceded effect in a simple, unbroken chain. He built what he called the chronoresonance generator, a device intended not to travel through time, but to prove that all potential futures simultaneously exist. The device was massive, consuming enough localized power to dim the lights across a 3-county area whenever it ran its critical cycle. By early 2003, Vance had achieved results that went beyond theoretical validation. His logs indicated he had managed a sustained temporal echo, a perfect feedback loop demonstrating that a minute change in the past could instantaneously ripple through every possible future, forcing a collapse into a singular new present. The machine didn't just observe the butterfly effect, it weaponized it. The last entry in his research journal wasn't a formula or an observation. It was a single sentence, written in a shaky hand. The truth is known. Humanity is not ready for the responsibility of truly knowing causality. He shut down the Nexus engine. He wiped 90% of his research. He uploaded that single, devastating file. And then Dr. Elias Vance, the man who had created the key to reality itself, vanished. His disappearance was not a result of failure, but a deliberate act of self-erasure, a desperate attempt to lock the door before the world realized it had been opened. And that decision, that single silent flap of the butterfly's wing in 2003, is why the world we live in today is unrecognizable from the one we expected. The Nexus file was dense. It wasn't a technical blueprint. It was a philosophical warning wrapped in quantum mechanics. It proved that if you could isolate a single variable at the moment of its potential branching, what Vance termed a nexus point, and impose an infinitesimally small, specific change, the resulting domino effect would rewrite the present. The key was the isolation and precision. Random, chaotic change was useless. Targeted, surgical influence was everything. The file sat on a government server for 2 years, classified so high that only a handful of analysts even knew it existed. They treated it as the ramblings of a paranoid genius, a theoretical exercise in alternate history. Until 2005, the event that finally validated Vance's fears wasn't a global disaster or a major political assassination. It was far more subtle, starting in the mundane world of logistics. The date was October 12, 2005. A specialized freight train carrying highly sensitive electronic components derailed outside of Reno, Nevada. It was a minor incident, quickly cleaned up, attributed to a faulty switch. The true consequence didn't manifest immediately. Those components were crucial microprocessors destined for the assembly line of a burgeoning, ambitious tech company in Silicon Valley. The delay, only 3 weeks, forced the CEO, a relentless innovator named Jian Li, to make a pivot. Li had planned to launch his flagship product, a revolutionary low-power satellite network, using those specific chips. With the delay, he was forced to adopt a different, slightly inferior, commercially available chipset from a rival firm. The subtle difference in the hardware changed everything. The rival chips had a negligible security flaw, a backdoor inherent in their design architecture. Li's satellite network, when it finally launched in 2007, was a success, connecting billions globally at a fraction of the previous cost. It was the backbone of the new, connected world. But that tiny inherited security flaw was a temporal echo of the Reno derailment. A team of state-sponsored hackers, operating from a small European nation, one that history books barely remember now, discovered the flaw in 2009. They didn't use it for espionage or finance. They used it to manipulate information at scale, invisibly. They began inserting subtle, undetectable changes into global databases, altering public perception not through overt lies, but through the precise, Vance-like application of curated truth. They didn't change what people saw. They changed what people cared about. The butterfly effect had started its full rotation. Because Jim had to wait 3 weeks, he used Chip B instead of because Chip B had a flaw. A small nation gained unprecedented control over digital reality. This wasn't a sudden explosion, but a creeping shift in the world's focus. Within 5 years, global priorities had subtly but decisively altered. Climate change slipped from existential crisis to manageable challenge. Geopolitical tensions shifted from territorial disputes to resource allocation for space colonization. The entire world's attention span, its collective fear and ambition, had been infinitesimally tilted. And no one, except perhaps the handful of analysts who still pored over the Nexus file, understood why everything suddenly felt wrong, like the global narrative had been subtly but irrevocably edited. The most insidious consequence of the temporal shift wasn't a visible catastrophe. It was the slow death of collective motivation. By 2015, the world was demonstrably wealthier, healthier, and technologically superior to the projected timelines of the early 2000s. Infant mortality was down 15%. Global poverty had been halved. Yet, the energy of progress had been redirected into niche, self-serving endeavors, driven by the subtle manipulation of data streams originating from a vulnerable satellite network. The grand, collaborative scientific projects of the pre-2005 era, fusion power research, large-scale medical genomics, stalled. Instead, massive private investment poured into personalized reality engines and bespoke digital ecosystems. The world became hyper-focused on optimization of the individual experience, retreating from unified, global challenges. This phenomenon became known academically as the Great Prioritization Shift. The statistics reveal the depth of the change. By 2018, R&D spending on deep space exploration exceeded climate change mitigation by a factor of 8. This wasn't because the data changed, but because the narrative framework surrounding the data was subtly altered by the controlled network. The message: Earth is a solved problem. The future is elsewhere. Consider the Arctic ice shelf. In the original timeline, its rapid collapse spurred global cooperation and a binding carbon treaty by 2020. In our timeline, the news reports documenting the melt were consistently coupled with simultaneous, glowing articles about the profitability of new offshore oil reserves suddenly made accessible. The visual information remained, but the emotional response, the necessary urgency, was systematically dampened. The crisis became a market opportunity. This is the hidden genius of the Nexus consequence. Humanity was nudged, not pushed. We chose the path of least resistance, but that path was paved with compromised information. Nations didn't invade each other. They simply stopped collaborating. International bodies withered not through revolution, but through irrelevance, as their core missions were subtly deprioritized by member states distracted by bespoke economic bubbles. In the mid-2020s, the small European state responsible for the initial hack attempted to leverage their power openly. They tried to halt an opposing political movement by flooding the digital space with overt disinformation. But the world had adapted. It wasn't that people trusted the satellites less. They simply stopped trusting anything that challenged their personalized digital reality. The system was now self-sustaining. People consumed data that validated their existing priorities, and the network ensured those validating priorities were always available. The biggest tragedy? Humanity achieved peak technological capability, but lost the capacity for unified moral consensus. We built the tools to save ourselves, but were nudged into using them to build more comfortable cages. The world became safer, flatter, and profoundly more fragmented, and all because one freight switch failed, forcing one CEO to choose chip B over chip A. That small flicker of randomness in 2005 had amplified into a deafening silence, where global purpose used to be. The ghosts of the futures Vance prevented. The futures where we met the challenges head-on haunt the edges of this hyper-optimized, yet strangely empty, present. The question remains, did Elias Vance disappear, or did he initiate the first, largest, and most deliberate nexus adjustment in history? Was his self-erasure the final, desperate variable he introduced into his own equation? Perhaps Vance understood that the existence of the nexus engine itself was the ultimate destabilizing force. He knew humanity, given the tool to predict and influence every cascading future, would invariably choose the safest, most immediate comfort, sacrificing long-term communal survival for instantaneous, personalized gain. He didn't destroy the knowledge. He merely delayed its understanding by 2 years, hiding it in plain sight, hoping the world would somehow evolve the moral maturity to handle it before the unintended consequence of the Reno derailment took root. He lost the gamble. We live now in a world of optimized isolation. We have achieved technical paradise, but we exist perpetually 3 steps removed from genuine global engagement. We are ghosts of the future we could have had, inhabiting a timeline where the greatest threats were successfully neutralized, not through bravery, but through calculated distraction. The legacy of the man who vanished in 2003 is not the technology he created, but the profound absence of the global crises we failed to face. He proved that causality can be weaponized. He proved that the smallest input can yield the largest, most irreversible output. But the Nexus file still exists, buried deep in government vaults, waiting for the few remaining analysts to connect the dots between a forgotten physicist, a derailed train, and the strange, quiet complacency of our modern world. If Vance proved that reality is malleable, then the ultimate lesson isn't about avoiding catastrophe, but about choosing which future we genuinely want to fight for. The butterfly has flapped its wings, but the storm has not yet settled. It is up to us, armed with the knowledge of causality, to find the next nexus point and finally, decisively, steer the course back toward meaningful consequence.